haven't we? Driven by social media, we're now living in tribes, and the tribes are completely indoctrinated. There's no way out of them. You can't be in the middle. You can't say, well, Trump has good points and bad points, or Boris is good or bad on this. You're in the tank for them, or you're in the tank against them. And I don't think that's healthy. I think it's really bad for democracy. And I think there's also this whole race to social change, much of which I completely embrace. I'm not going to sit here and defend anything that even whiffs of racism, sexism, or anything like that. But the kind of radical, zealous nature of debate these days about whether it's veganism or gender fluidity or whatever it may be, has also got completely out of hand, where people are not allowed to debate it. You're not allowed to have a conversation. You're not allowed to actually say, well, hang on a second. What about the repercussions of this? If one tribe decides that you're wrong, you have to be cancelled, taken off the airways, you have to be destroyed, your lives ruined, because somebody has decided they don't agree with you. And it's not about things which are genuinely, properly unacceptable and defensive. Often it's about stuff where someone's just decided they find something offensive. And we've got to somehow get back, I think, to a world where we can have proper conversation and debate again. So anyway, that's where the world's gone nuts, ridiculously soft. I think we're now breeding a generation who are encouraged to think there's no such thing as a loss. Go through failure, I think, to be any good. You know, I've learned far more from failure than I've ever done from success. And I think, again, we've got to get back to a more competitive spirit. The snowflake generation, they hate being called snowflakes. Of course they do. They hate everything. And they're frightened by everything, and they're offended by everything, and they're sort of, you know, anxiety rates are going through the roof. And the reason is because they've had it so easy. Let's be completely clear about life today. In recorded history of planet Earth, it's never been a safer time to be alive. There are fewer wars than in recorded history. People are living longer than in recorded history, and they are living in a healthier way than in recorded history. There is less poverty than in recorded history. On almost every single box you would want to tick, which should make you feel happy about life, is ticked. This is the best time, statistically, to ever be alive. Yeah, if you talk to the younger generation, this is the worst time every minute of their lives to ever exist. And they have anxiety about absolutely everything.
A person who was a match could be killed on demand so that his or her organs could be sold. I never wanted to live in any sort of socialism again. But here in the US, I'm starting to feel that it has followed me. Not only many politicians are making socialism sound so sweet, but the majority of young Americans are attracted by it. But here is what it really is. In communist China, the government, or rather, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, controls everything. And because it controls everything, it can make all the rules, it can take away people's liberty, property, and dignity, and persecute them at will. So ever since the CCP took power 70 years ago, more than half of the population has been persecuted one way or the other. Over 8 million people died of unnatural deaths. My family and I suffered too. I was thrown into prison 4 times and then sent to a labor camp for simply practicing Falun Gong, which is only a mind-body-spirit practice to improve mental and physical health. The labor camp felt like entering right into hell. From the very first moment we were in, we were forced to squat like this, with our hands putting behind our heads, our heads lowered, and our eyes looking at our feet motionlessly, squatting like this under the baking sun for 15 hours. Whenever someone couldn't endure or fainted, electric batons were immediately used on them so that they would be revived to continue with the squatting. On the second day in the camp, 2 police guards dragged me from the cell into the courtyard, threw me onto the ground, applied 2 electric batons on me all over the body until I lost consciousness. Every day was a struggle between life and death. We were not only under endless torture, physical and mental, but were also forced to do endless slave hard labor. All the products we made in the camp were exported to overseas countries, including the United States. And we were also subjected to physical examinations and blood tests. The purpose? The data of our blood and tissue types were stored in the computer system. So when someone in any part of the world needed an organ, the person who was a match could be killed on demand so that his or her organs could be sold for organ transplantations. This is not a plot in a horror novel or Hollywood movie, but a real and heinous crime perpetrated against innocent people.
So I try not to go hard on these sort of things, but this was so woke that I just couldn't pass it up. Now, I don't mean anything I'm going to say in a mean spirit, but the consequences of what they're proposing here are just staggering. The implications are so wide-reaching and destructive to things women want, done by people who are born male, that I have to have some comment on this. So the comic, if you can't see it, is "What's up, Steffi? You don't look too well." Just some cat caller outside. It was awful. I feel gross now. Welcome to womanhood. That's what it's like to be a girl, which is the crux of the issue here. Why do you say that? Because I'm trans? Because you feel like I signed up for this crap? Huh? This is an insult now. Look, you probably meant well, but don't go around telling trans girls what it's like to be a girl. It sends the message you don't see our experiences as part of what it means to be a woman. And obviously the other woman apologises. And the text that goes with it is, stop welcoming trans girls and women into womanhood. Our experiences are part of what it means to be women as much as cis girls. So, men who feel like, or boys who feel like they're, I suppose we use men, just I think they're using girl and womanhood interchangeably. So part of what it is to be male is also part of what it is to be female. Unironically, if you're not familiar with the terms, I'm sure you would be, but if you're not, trans means transitioning from one sex to another, or gender. I'm not even sure actually. I don't know why they transition if sex and gender are not correlated. But anyway, cis girls are people, girls who are women who are born. Their gender and their sex correspond. So they're biological females and they identify as women. The scope of this is amazing, like I was saying, right? So, if men have always been women, if they want, if they feel like it, then there is no space that a man can't go. There is no sport the man can't enter. There is, no club, no special privilege or anything that would be something that women have apart from men. There would be no place that they couldn't go, because what you're saying, by definition, would be that trans women are not women. The implication is you are forced to ignore that there is a biological distinction between someone born male who transitions to becoming a woman and someone born female who just remains in the gender that they have been assigned at birth, as they would say. It's so woke. It's completely, it's not compromising with the new ideas. It is positioning yourself at the starting point of the new ideas, the intersectional ideas, and saying, right, so because most people start in a biological framework. Most people start from a sort of natural biological framework they've experienced as they're growing up. But if you're going to frame it like this, then you've got to be like, right, okay, so I have always been a woman, even at the points that I didn't realise I was a woman, and I was actually being discriminated against, so I'm now the victim of society, and other women are being bigoted to me, so people who have penises and testicles will be able to berate women for being misogynistic, effectively.
At the Melbourne Gender Service, which is part of the Royal Children's Hospital, in 2012 they had 18 kids come to them with gender dysphoria, and in 2016 they had 226 kids, so in 4 years from 18 to 226. 66% of the kids go on puberty suppressors. And a study released the other day from the Telephone Institute here said that they've looked at all of the research and they've found that puberty suppressants are really good for kids' mental health. For those children, not all of them go on, right, but for those children that are freaking out about acquiring sexual characteristics that they don't identify with, it's really good. So that must be reassuring for parents when you are, we don't yet know the long-term effects, but for the moment, often mental health is the priority, right?
I'm a mother whose daughter has identified as transgender since the age of 14. I am here today because I love her and because I care deeply about her and other kids who identify as transgender. These are young people, like my daughter, who are in turmoil and who are not getting the compassionate care that they need and deserve. I am going to explain to you what happens when parents seek out expert advice to help their transgender identifying children explore their feelings and discomfort with their sex. What is affirmative care? The current standard of treatment promoted by medical and psychological associations is called affirmative care. Well, this sounds nice. Affirmative care leads directly to putting children on the path to medical transition with little chance of turning back. Let me explain to you how this works. If you take your child to a clinic to seek help, affirmative care means the therapist must follow the child's lead. The professionals must accept a child's gender identity. In fact, this is the law in many states. Under conversion therapy bans, questioning a child's gender identity is now illegal. So if a little boy is 5 years old and believes he is the opposite sex, affirmative care means going along with his beliefs. Parents are encouraged to refer to him as their daughter and let him choose a feminine name. Teachers are told to let him use the girls' bathroom at school. Therapists will reassure parents that social transition is harmless and reversible. Is it really harmless to tell a child who still believes in the tooth fairy that he is the opposite sex? Isn't it quite likely that this child is just confused? If a 10-year-old girl is uncomfortable with her developing body and suddenly insists she is a boy, affirmative care means blocking this girl's puberty with powerful drugs. Doctors will tell parents this is a perfectly safe and reversible way for her to explore her gender. Affirmative care does not help this child get to the cause of her discomfort. Medicating her with these drugs is not safe. In fact, her future fertility, sexual functioning, and bone development may be negatively impacted. Once the teenage years begin, affirmative care means giving young people cross-sex hormones. Girls as young as 12 are prescribed testosterone for lifetime usage, while boys are given estrogen. These are serious hormonal treatments that impact brain development, cardiovascular health, and may increase the risk of cancer. There are no long-term studies to prove this is necessary, safe, or prudent, while there are many known hazards to using these same hormones when medically treating adults.
I'm really into oversized clothes recently.
What about some of this vintage clothing here?
Yeah, that can be nice. I like this.
It's a summer morning in London's Camden Market, and Australian teenager Patrick Mitchell is busy hunting for bargains. Would you wear t-shirts?
No, not really. I can't really wear them right now.
He's after new clothes to match his old life. You've been a boy and a girl.
Mm-hmm. I guess.
What's it like?
Well, I don't know. You kind of have an image of what being a boy and being a girl is like, but when you actually experience it, it's very different. It's nice to be able to buy shoes now, because I couldn't buy the women's shoes because I'm too big.
Born a boy, Patrick spent the last 2 years living as a girl.
Do you need shoes for school?
Now, at 14, he's decided he's a boy after all.
Something like that. Yeah.
But there's a constant reminder of his life as a female. Tell me if you're uncomfortable, but you've grown breasts, haven't you, as a result of the hormone therapy that you were being given?
Yeah, so I just started developing like a girl would, and which was the thing that I wanted at that time, but now that's not so helpful.
Thank you for the invitation, Ryan, and the introduction. Congratulations, it's a boy. Or, congratulations, it's a girl. In 20 years, nearly 20 years as a practicing pediatrician, that's often how my patient relationships started. Our bodies declare our biological sex. Biological sex is not assigned. Biological sex is imprinted by our DNA at the moment of conception, and it's in every single cell of our bodies. Human sexuality is binary. You either have a functioning Y chromosome and will develop into a male, or you do not, and you will develop into a female. Identity is not biological. Identity has to do with our thinking and our feelings. Thoughts and feelings are not hardwired before birth. They develop over time. Our thoughts and feelings, our self-perceptions may be factually correct, or they could be factually wrong. And I'll give you some examples. And within these examples, you're going to understand or come to see fact versus ideology. If I were to walk into my physician's office today and say, "Hi, Dr. So-and-so, I'm Margaret Thatcher," my physician is going to look at me and diagnose me as having a delusion, give me an antipsychotic, and send me to a therapist. If I walk up to that same physician and say, "I am a man," my physician will say, "Congratulations, you're transgender." There is no blood test, there is no imaging, there is no confirmatory way to diagnose transgender except from the person's word, take the person's word for it, because identity is not in the body, it is in our thinking. Another example, if I go to my physician and say, "I am so anxious, so depressed, I'm suicidal some days, I am an amputee trapped in a normal body," I will be diagnosed with body identity integrity disorder. If I go to the same physician and say, "I am a man, please refer me to a breast surgeon for a double mastectomy," my physician is expected to do so. So, most, not all medical organizations, but most mainstream medical and psychological organizations essentially say, if a patient walks into you wanting to have a healthy arm or leg removed, they're mentally ill. But if a healthy patient, biologically normal and healthy patient, walks in and wants their breasts or a penis removed, they are transgender, and don't you dare tell them anything differently, because that's discrimination. No one is born with hardwired thoughts and feelings. No one is predetermined before birth to be transgender. We know this scientifically by looking at twin studies. Any trait that is set, biologically set, prior to birth will be found in identical twins 100% of the time. So if you have a trait that is only determined determined solely by, let's say, prenatal hormones changing the brain, by DNA altering the person, that's going to be found in identical twins 100% of the time, meaning that if you have an identical twin who's transgender, his identical or hers identical twin should also be transgender. This is not the case. In studies, the majority of transgender twins were found to differ significantly. All right. Dr. Cretella, why should we believe you? Can you give us an example? Yes, I can. We're not saying these children with this thought process should be ignored. I had a patient, we'll call him Andy. This was a good 10 years ago. Between the ages of 3 and 5, little Andy increasingly played with girl toys, stereotypical girl toys. He really made friends more easily with girls, and he started telling his parents, "Mommy, Daddy, I am a girl." I referred the family to a therapist. Now, the therapist's focus was basically to understand Andy and his family's story, to look at those family dynamics, because oftentimes, sometimes with mental illness in children, it may be due to mental illness in a parent or both parents. It may be due to child abuse, but often children are misperceiving just what may be benign family dynamics. A couple months is hard work. Therapy is hard work. But during one session, they had a breakthrough. Andy had a truck and a Barbie. He put the truck down. He looked up at his parents and said, "Mommy and Daddy, you don't love me when I'm a boy." Now the therapist had something to work with. These parents were great parents. They were super parents. But when Andy was 3, he went from being an only child to having a sister born with special needs. The mom and dad were great parents, but his sister needed a whole lot of care and attention. And Andy internalized, not every child would internalize this way, but for Andy, he did. Mommy and Daddy love girls. If I want them to love me like they did before, I have to be a girl. It's not conscious. It's all subconscious.
We need to get information out as quickly as possible because we want everybody to thrive with autism. Is gender dysphoria? What is gender dysphoria?
Gender dysphoria is an unhappiness with your birth gender. And this may cause very deep depression and seeking a solution. And sometimes that solution may be to become transgender and to change that gender, which may be achieved in a variety of ways that can include not only medication and hormones, but also surgery. In society a number of years ago, this was very much a taboo subject. Gender identity and gender preference and aspects of sexuality are now much more open than they have ever been. Recently, I talked to a clinical psychologist who's doing research in a gender dysphoria clinic, and those exist in most major cities, for adults. And she'd done a screening of the referrals to that gender identity clinic, and a quarter of the referrals had signs of an autism spectrum disorder. So the services for those with gender dysphoria are now realizing we need to know about ASD.
What does it feel like for somebody that would be experiencing gender dysphoria?
We use the phrase coming out, and often the person has come out to themselves in elementary, perhaps junior high school, where they've realized that they are different to their gender peers in a number of aspects. And it may be teens or adult years that they come out openly to other people, maybe family members. And this is a very risky situation because sometimes parents will accept that and say, "I love you, whatever your gender." Others become horrified by that process because it is a huge shift in perception and thinking of the future and so on. And often that person will be questioned about the legitimacy of their decision. Why do you want to do that? Almost in an accusatory way. And that person is going through a very, very tough time. They need understanding and listening.
When they say they're not comfortable with their assignment of sexuality at birth, is it because they don't fulfill the roles that society is telling them they should fulfill as that gender? Or is it a sexual orientation? They're attracted to the sex that's the same as they are.
A very strong reason associated with not liking your gender is how you perceive gender roles. And in ASD, there can be a very black and white perception. So you may have a person who was born male with ASD and say, I'm not macho, I'm not interested in sport, I'm not interested in bullying and teasing, I'm compassionate, I'm kind. I identified more with the girls and their compassion, and therefore maybe I am more feminine. And the same goes with some of the girls who may say, well, I don't get the girls' bitchiness and meanness, and I'm not only kind and nice, I don't do bitchiness, but I also find the boys are simple and easy, and they're making things and doing things, and so I really enjoy being with the boys. I am not a typical girl. Maybe being a boy would be an appealing option without realizing. And what I try and encourage is you can be male but still have some female characteristics. You can be female and have male characteristics. You don't have to be the ultra feminine or ultra macho. So in part it's understanding the variation that can occur in that situation. My own clinical experience is that it has rarely been in the sense of a homosexuality orientation. It's more a question of gender rather than necessarily sexuality. There obviously are exceptions, but it's usually on a process of self and self-acceptance. So as a clinician in the early stages of this, I may work with the person saying, whatever your gender, let's explore who you are, and a satisfaction and enjoyment of who you are. Because if you are seeing changing gender as a solution to a number of problems, will it solve them, or will they continue? So it's looking at that person's lifestyle and exploring it further.
Now, here's what would happen today. Today, Andy's pediatrician would refer Andy and his family to gender specialists or a gender clinic. The parents would immediately be told, this is who Andy is. Why? Because here's how you diagnose a transgender child. The child must consistently, persistently insist that they are not their biological sex. Bingo, done. You were born this way. Parents, you must socially transition your child, change his name to a girl's name, and ensure everyone else treats him as a her. Because if you don't, he will grow up to commit suicide. The experts work with the family, the school system, and shepherd this child along in this confusion until they approach puberty, at which point, oh, now we must put you on puberty blockers. Because if we don't block your physical development, your child will become very anxious and depressed as the facts of their biology develop. So we want to block them, arrest this development so that we can give the child more time to think. Now, mind you, puberty blockers also arrest brain development, but you want them to think more clearly. Now, what the experts don't share with the family is this is an off-label use. It's not FDA approved. And by the way, when we use the puberty blocker, Lupron, to treat prostate cancer in adult men, it's associated with memory problems. And we found similar findings when the Lupron is used to treat certain gynecological issues in women, adult women. We've never had long-term studies on puberty blockers being used in biologically normal children. This is experimentation. So they start with the puberty blockers, and this physically isolates the child because what's happening to their friends around them? their peers are growing up. They're being more psychosocially isolated as their peers develop along the normal pubertal trajectory, and they do not. So, we must put them on the cross-sex hormones. What are the risks of cross-sex hormones? So a boy, Andy, would be put on estrogen. If it were a little girl, her cross-sex hormone would be testosterone. These are serious drugs. They, over the lifetime, raise your risk cardiovascular disease. So cardiac, stroke, diabetes, various cancers. These are not benign medications. And they also can cause depression, anxiety. I thought that's what we wanted to treat. This is the standard of care now. It is does affirmative care look like? This is what is called gender affirming top surgery, also known as a double mastectomy. They are performed on girls as young as 13 years old, otherwise healthy girls who believe they are transgender. This is a picture of a woman's arm after the skin and other tissue was removed to fashion a fake penis. Jazz Jennings is an example of affirmative care. Jazz was born a boy but raised as a girl since the age of 5. He was treated hormonally since age 11. Last year, at the age of 17, Jazz had surgery to remove his penis and create a simulated vagina out of his stomach lining. After surgery, Jazz's wounds began separating and a blood blister began to form. An emergency surgery was performed. According to Jazz's doctor, as I was getting her on the bed, I heard something go pop. When I looked, the whole thing had split open. This is a picture of Jazz's face in pain from these surgical complications. This is a medical experiment on a child that has been playing out on television for the past 12 years. No one knows what might happen next.
First firestorm, really, of a voice being suppressed. Michael Bailey wrote a book called The Man Who Would Be Queen back in 2003. The subtitle was The Science of Gender Bending in Transsexualism. Transgender used to be called transsexualism. And Bailey described the work of Ray Blanchard, who worked in the 1980s, who described 2 distinctly different types of transsexuals. One was homosexual men, and that's what most people think of when we think of transgender, is that these are gay men. They traditionally have been just dissatisfied with societal sex role stereotypes and expectations from men, and believing instead that they must really be women. And in the past, they had support for that. But Bailey noted that Blanchard also said that there are heterosexual men called autogynephilic. That was Blanchard's term. It was coined in 1989, and it means men who are erotically obsessed with the image of themselves as women. They are not women trapped in a man's body. They have sexual arousal at the idea of themselves as women, and they now may be, probably are the majority of transgender identified males. They are really more men trapped in men's bodies, and Anne Lawrence, who is himself a trans-identified man, wrote a book about that called Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, where he interviewed over 300 of these guys. So the book would have gone, it probably would have been gone nowhere. It was nominated for a Lambda Literary Foundation award, which it didn't get. It only sold a few thousand copies and probably would have gone nowhere were it not for the firestorm that erupted. Transgender activists said that the book was misleading, that it was false, and what they did made it into a book written in 2015 by Alice Drager, who's a science historian, called Galileo's Middle Finger. This was a book about scientific controversies and threats to a free press and free academic inquiry. And in Bailey's case, Drager writes that a small group tried to bury a politically challenging scientific theory by killing the messenger. So the firestorm that erupted wasn't really directed at Bailey's ideas, it was directed at Bailey. Drager did essentially investigative reporting. She interviewed every single individual involved, every person that Bailey had interviewed in his book. She dug up original documents and she corroborated or debunked every claim. The transgender activists who assailed Bailey accused him of abusing the rights of subjects, having sex with a subject, making up data. They accused him, he received threats and harassments via emails relentlessly. Pictures of his kids were posted online with sexualized captions. He was accused of sodomizing his own daughter. His academic colleagues were contacted and were told that Bailey was an alcoholic and they should encourage him to move. They accused him of practicing without a license and that he had no ethics oversight in his research. Drager, who did a terrific job, identified an individual who set up really an enormous website hosted by a large state university for the purpose of taking down Bailey. And she said that she figured out that what really had been done, that it wasn't his ideas, that it was essentially set up in an effort to shut him up about autogynephilia.
But again, I mean, you have to weigh these things up. Is it better to talk or not to talk, speak or not to speak? And I think it's better to speak.
And that's really what this book is about. It's about having these conversations that right now are unpopular, and typically, maybe mostly on social media, seem to be completely dominating the conversation and going in very, very strange ways.
I think we're all lying about a whole range of things, and mainly to do with these issues I address in The Madness of Crowds. And I think there's a cost to that, as I say, of bad ideas seeping into the whole system. And individuals in their lives, I think, know this and can feel it. Not everybody, but broadly speaking by now, if you don't think that the sort of woke intersectional culture is coming for you, then it's only because you're self-employed. As I was researching this book was, no, it's everywhere. It's like the corporate world. People in big banks and big corporations and energy companies and media, of course, they all have these diversity departments and diversity enforcement departments and human resources departments and all these sorts of things, which are in some companies the only really growing bit of the company. I mean, they're doing really well, some of these human resources people. But so many people I've spoken to in recent years, they're trying to work this stuff out because it's all being imposed on them. And of course, it's got some good in it. It's got some good intentions in it. It's just what it's going to lead us to all is hell. So everybody's sort of thinking about this, but they're not able to speak about it. And if they do, they are a serious likelihood of losing their job. I mean, there are very, very famous examples of people who've just slipped up once. You know, Tim Hunt, Nobel Prize-winning scientist, does a joke at a conference in South Korea. One woman in the room says that it's a sexist joke, and by the time he's back in the UK, he's fired from every position. Every position. There are cases, famous cases like the James Damore case in Google. You know, Google says they want some ideas. This, tech guy gives some ideas. Bang, he's out. And people learn from that. They learn not to speak, not to air worries and concerns. So, I think it's the self-appointed task of those of us who do not have wobbly hierarchies over us to speak.
And that's why writers can talk about this stuff more freely than a lot of other people.
I think we're the only people who can now.
Right.
Right-wing has become the language of common sense. You get to say things which are not politically correct, but are essentially correct.
Australians are calling for an end to politically correct madness and a return to common sense. And media veterans like Ita, who was with us last week, and Baby John Burgess think it's time to fight back and ban the bans.
Also, I'll do whatever it takes to stop protesting. I will take to the streets! Canadian professor and psychologist Jordan B. Peterson is a cultural critic who hates Marxism, political correctness and the radical left.
And gained national notoriety in the fall of 2016 when he spoke out about a federal bill on gender expression.
And millennials think that you're attacking a little girl when you criticize her radical message. Yes, this is really the rebuttal. Question her conclusions about climate change and the people around her, and you are an afraid and insecure male that can't handle a little girl putting you in your place. The reaction to backlash and defense kicking in is the very reason why the marketing forces behind Greta Thunberg selected a now 16-year-old autistic girl that essentially looks like she's 12 as their spokesperson, because most people will unthinkingly just see what is right in front of their eyes. And they will connect emotionally with the messenger. Whatever the message is, it will be swallowed wholesale, hook, line, and sinker. And most people will feel sorry for Greta, or they feel sad when they see her act out her emotions and frustrations mixed with her kind of odd autistic social behavior. So all of this is obviously very smart. I mean, emotionally deliver messages, and of course semi-well-crafted scripts. Some of the lines she has is effectful. I see that. And they place her on a stage at an important event in front of cameras with millions of viewers, and so people who have that special sense of social justice will defend her and her message. As a kind of a reflex, really, when they see old, white and angry, bitter old men, white supremacists. They question her or put her down or say something like, oh, just relax, little girl, or, it's not as bad as you think it is, etc. This actually happened with Trump. Even after he hilariously said very positive things about her, people were freaking out. Number 7, younger sister Beata lives with ADHD, Asperger's syndrome, and OCD. She is also prone to sudden outbursts of anger during which she screams obscenities at her mother. Despite this, she frequently performs in front of audiences and often choreographs her performances as well.
And a U of T policy to call students by their gender pronoun of choice.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
In Canada, they did legislate it. The provincial and Canadian government, or the provincial and federal governments in Canada, mandated the use of personal pronouns and made it a criminal offense not to use them, at least under some circumstances. And there's been a variety of negative consequences of that, including the persecution of a teaching assistant at a university known as Wilfrid Laurier. And it isn't a matter of respect at all. And look, in the 1940s, the American Supreme Court, and Americans have a very tight, what would you call, control or tight respect for free speech, decided that it was not constitutional for the government to place mandatory requirements on what people were required to utter in terms of their voluntary speech. There are certain things you can't say, but the government's not to mandate what you have to say. And respect and altruism and all of that is completely irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
So just to clarify that point, if the government had said, made it a kind of voluntary thing, but with advice that that's what should happen, would you have gone along with that?
Well, they've been doing that for years,
yeah.
and I'm perfectly, look, I've dealt with all sorts of people in my life. I treat people very politely. As a matter of course, if I'm dealing with someone reasonable, I address them in the manner that seems to be most appropriate to the social situation and most conducive to their, let's say, well-being mutually agreed upon. But as soon as the government decides that they have the right to decide what I have to say because of some false altruism on their part or some underlying and unexpressed ideology, then the answer to that is no damn way.
A poll indicated that people are starting to feel like political correctness is having a negative effect on society. How do you feel about it? This week, let's talk about that.
It's been carried overboard. people are getting a little crazy with having to worry about every little word they say and whether it's actually politically correct or not.
Well, if you live in this country, you should be politically correct because this is your country.
What does that mean? Is that so you have to censor what you say?
You should think about what you say. You should take time to use the correct words before you say something that you don't mean.
I don't know, I mean, we've got a thing in England where certain comedians are being pulled up on political correctness, where I think you've just got to realise, especially with comedy, just loosen up. You know, everyone's going to be offended by something, and I just think there's always going to be someone who will look for something to complain about.
My generation, we don't really care. We just laugh, it's funny. But it just depends if, like, generations are crossing. If you're talking to some elderly people, then, yeah, you show some respect even if, you know, you don't completely think it's necessary.
It's different when you're younger, but when you start getting a bit older, you realise that sometimes what comes out of your mouth is not a pearl.
It's refreshing to see somebody like Chris Christie from New Jersey, close here, that speaks his mind regardless of what the consequences are versus always being worried what people are going to think, what the poll numbers show.
So you'd rather be offended and at least have the truth?
Yes, very much so.
Sam to Jane Bond, and every gender definition in between. There is one man who is guaranteed to call you out if he thinks social change has quite literally gone nuts. It is, of course, Piers Morgan.
Who are oversensitive. People who can't have an argument annoy me. We all have to be saved from ourselves. We're all dreadful people. Terrible, toxic people. They completely destroyed Percy Pigs, right? Just to cater for a few vegans.
Oh, Piers, don't be obtuse. Isn't that the whole setup of the show that you're trying to seduce?
The whole thing's called Love Island. They go on there and have sex with random strangers. That's the whole point of it. It's a shock for people. Pigs are made of meat. I can't do it. How long is this on for? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bang! Oh, for God's sake! My head be cut off! Now you want to get rid of Fireman Sam? I ain't playing, and I may just take my ball and go home. It's just all of you who've been ignored, who've been disenfranchised, and it's for you that I'm furious. In my DNA to just be hugely opinionated about absolutely everything. I mean, you know, it's not everyone's cup of tea, obviously, but I try and work myself into indignant rages on most subjects.
And then put a poll out on the television. And actually, a lot of the times, people come back agreeing with you.
Well, we live in this, the world gone nuts thing came about because we live in a very weird world now, don't we, where absolutely everybody appears to be incredibly offended by everything. And it means that comedians can't operate anymore because every joke is offensive. It means that Donald Trump comes along and you're in one tribe or the other. There can be no middle ground. Brexit happens here, Boris Johnson. Again, it's tribal. And someone described it to me as 2,000 years ago, we used to literally live in tribes. And you'd be in your tribe and you'd never leave your own area. So you only mix with your own people. And you all look the same, you dress the same, you have the same values, the same opinions, same conversations. And then very slowly but surely, we all went out into the big bad world and we met other tribes. And they would look different, they would speak differently, they'd have different opinions. And both tribes, at this moment of meeting these weird other people, decided the only possible way to resolve things was to kill each other. And that's where we've gone back to, haven't we? Driven by social media, we're now living in tribes.
Behaved as they pleased. Gambling, cockfighting, that was the start of it. They always carried their weapons and used them in arguments.
What happened during the conflict? Can you explain a little bit more about it? What was the conflict about?
They attacked us first, killing 2 people from our village. If you are good to us, then we'll be very good to you. But if you treat us badly, then we will treat you worse.
And the tribes are completely indoctrinated. There's no way out of them. You can't be in the middle. You can't say, well, Trump has good points and bad points, or Boris is good or bad on this. You're in the tank for them or you're in the tank against them. And I don't think that's healthy. I think it's really bad for democracy. So this whole race to social change, much of which I completely embrace. I'm not going to sit here and defend anything that even whiffs of racism, sexism, or anything like that. But the kind of radical, zealous nature of debate these days about whether it's veganism or gender fluidity or whatever it may be, has also got completely out of hand, where people are not allowed to debate it, you're not allowed to have a conversation, you're not allowed to actually say, well, hang on a second, what about the repercussions of this? If one tribe decides that you're wrong, you have to be cancelled, taken off the airways, you have to be destroyed, your lives ruined, because somebody has decided they don't agree with you. About things which are genuinely, properly unacceptable and defensive. Often it's about stuff where someone's just decided they find something offensive. And we've got to somehow get back, I think, to a world where we can have proper conversation and debate again. And that's what we try and do on Good Morning Britain. I don't assume I'm right about everything. I mean,
but
I can be proven wrong, but I'm certainly prepared to have someone in front of me and respect their opinion and listen to the argument and be persuaded. We have got to get back to that, I think.